G'day, it's your old mate Matthew here. Welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. In this episode, we have a good yarn with Richard Adams from Taskforce Kiwi. I find this interesting for a number of reasons, really. The whole idea of Taskforce Kiwi is a veteran-based disaster relief organisation, and that's turning up for people who are struggling in a disaster. The whole idea that it's really giving veterans purpose, identity, and community is fantastic. That's the whole idea of the Yarnsman too. The other thing I really liked is how he's taken his dark time of the fall of Afghanistan and his work there and turned that into a positive and creating this organisation to be able to help people. I think there's also a bonus plug in there that talking about the mental health benefits of volunteering. So certainly check out their organisation, and the links to register your interest will be in the description. Hope you enjoy the yarn. Hello and welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. Today we have Richard Adams with us in the high-tech podcast studio. How are you, Richard?
I'm well, thank you, Matthew. Well, how about yourself?
Yeah, very well. Good to have you here. Richard's a father, husband, an army man, and the founder of Taskforce Kiwi. I'm really looking forward to this yarn. We'll start it off. What have you struggled with in the last week?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think struggled with keeping my head above water, I think, is the main one. So I was away with my full-time role, so with the Defence Force, overseas for a few weeks. Got back a week ago and haven't been away. I was up in Europe, and as a result, there's a lot of Taskforce Kiwi stuff that didn't get done from my end. So I've spent the last week trying to play catch up, and it was harder than I thought it was going to be. Just the amount of stuff that did come in when I was away that needed to be done that I wasn't able to do, and then getting back trying to get all that stuff done while still doing my obviously full-time role. So the to-do list, instead of shrinking, grew over the course of the last week. So yeah, it's just sort of, as I say, keeping my head above water has been a bit of a struggle.
We were talking before we got on air about setting up an organisation so that it's not focused on one. Have you found that when you're away that you do have that in place to support you?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky in that I have a really awesome coordination team. For Taskforce Kiwi. Some of them are here in Christchurch, others are different parts of the country, who carry out different functions and do a huge amount of work. So the wheels keep turning when I'm not around, but at the same time I've got my own stuff that I need to get done in my role. So that's sort of where I struggle.
We're allowed to know where you were in Europe? Or is that a question I have to delete?
No. I'm just thinking if I'll get a slap on the wrist from Defence Public Affairs. No, I was in the UK and in Latvia, just doing some defence engagement stuff.
Okay, interesting. What do you want to work on in the next week?
I think it's just trying to get ahead of the curve, sort of following on from last week. There's a number of things that I still need to catch up on, need to get done, but there's also a number of projects that I want to start moving or get in place for Taskforce Kiwi that just require time and effort. Effort's usually all right. It's the time that's in short supply. So, between having a full-time role, having a young family, and having to walk the dog every day, it's sort of finding the time to sit down and focus. But yeah, there are a number of sort of quite defined projects that I want to get rolling in the next week, just to help continue build the organisation.
We're obviously going to get deep into this
Sure, yeah.
Shortly.
Yep.
Shortly.
Yeah.
What are you grateful for?
I mean, it sounds a bit cliche, but I'm very grateful for my family. I've got two great kids, a 4-year-old daughter, 2-year-old son, and I'm especially grateful for my wife Dee. So, I'm away quite a lot, whether it's with Defence or with Taskforce Kiwi, and she holds down the fort, looks after the kids at the same time, building her own career, which is already far outstretched whatever I'm going to achieve. It's got a brain the size of a planet and has done some pretty incredible stuff so far. But she still manages to do that while letting me go off and do my sort of boys' own stuff every now and then. And I wouldn't be able to do that without that support. So I'm incredibly grateful for Dee, my family, and for my parents as well. They step into the breach every now and then. And then beyond that, I'm just grateful for the people I work with as part of Taskforce Kiwi. So, as I think I mentioned before we started recording, we've just gone over 700 volunteers now
Which is
nationwide.
amazing, right?
Which is awesome. Like the fact that 700 people are happy to put their name down to give up their own time to help people they've never met is pretty cool. And this, while the concept of this organisation, it's a cool idea, it's nothing without the people who actually step up, give up their own time, do the hard mahi to actually make it happen. So I'm incredibly grateful for all of those people, for every single person who's signed up, every single person who's deployed or has helped in some way, shape or form. Because without them, again, it would just be an idea in my head.
Great. What gives you meaning?
Being useful. I think it's pretty simple, but that's what it comes down to. In terms of a career, I've never sort of been focused on money for better or worse, depending on what my mortgage looks like. But it's about being useful, about having a sense of purpose in the morning to get out of bed and actually make a difference, or at least attempt to make a difference. So obviously with Taskforce Kiwi, it's pretty straightforward. The work that our wider volunteer team does is really, really impactful. So just, it is, it's hard work. From my perspective, it takes up a lot of time, but it's, wouldn't give it up for anything. It's entirely worth it, and it does give me meaning. And then look, my full-time role at Defence as well. It's there is an element of service involved there too. So it gives me meaning as well.
Love it. Well, let's dive into Taskforce Kiwi because I've been holding off and really want to get into it. Tell us the story behind it, what inspired it, and tell us about it.
Yeah, so in terms of the background, I guess there's two sort of parallel stories. One is about the concept of sort of veteran-based disaster relief, and then the other one is more sort of focused on where Taskforce Kiwi came from, which is, I guess, linked to my own story. So looking at the first one, it was back in, I think it was October 2010. There was a massive earthquake in Haiti, killed hundreds of thousands of people, sort of biblical-sized event. And as with anything of that scale, the international community sprung into action, usual aid services, UN, governments, whoever it might be, sort of flying in aid and supplies and assistance. While that was happening, there was a small number of US Marines that just got out of the Marines, just gone through their the separation process, and they had a bit of spare time on their hands. They saw this happening on TV and thought, can we help? How can we? We've got some pretty good skills. I reckon we've got some time. Why don't we go and assist? So they made some inquiries to the usual suspects, people like Save the Children or the Red Cross, saying, this is who we are. How can we help? And the response was either, well, you can't help us at the moment, or to give them a role that was wholly unsuited to their skill set. So, I don't know, for example, manning a call center in the US somewhere, making calls.
Fundraising.
Something like that. Which didn't really cut it. So they made a fairly bold call and they just jumped on a plane, flew down to the Dominican Republic. They picked up a couple of stragglers on the way, other people who just wanted to help out, mostly with a medical focus. And then when they got to the Dominican Republic, they crossed by foot across the river that's the acts at the border between Dominican Republic and Haiti, and then just basically got to work for 2 weeks, providing direct support to those impacted, mainly with a focus on sort of first aid and medical support. They somewhat modestly, they compared their decision to cross that river border with Caesar's decision to cross the Rubicon with his legions, and they called their organisation Team Rubicon as a result. So from those fairly humble beginnings, Team Rubicon in the US now has 180,000 volunteers across the country. So headquartered in every single state, and they're a key part of any disaster relief efforts in the US, as they have been for a number of years. From there, a number of other groups or Team Rubicon sprung up. So Team Rubicon Canada, then there's one in the UK, Australia, and in Norway as well. So it's almost had like a sort of franchise type setup around the world, all these similar organisations based around those who had served in the military or defence force, but also those who had served in some sort of emergency services or first responder or the first responder community. In late 2019, early 2020, there's a little bit of a disagreement about some things. So some of the Team Rubicons dropped off and became independent. So in Australia, they're now Disaster Relief Australia. In the UK, they're now React Disaster Response in the UK. And then Taskforce Kiwi joined that group in 2022 when we were formed. So there is, I'd like to claim it was a New Zealand idea. Unfortunately, it wasn't. So just have to credit where credit's due. So the Americans first started off, and it's, as I say, with 180,000 volunteers across the states now, it's been incredibly successful, and it really proves a point, which helped us a lot because whether it's in the States, the UK, Australia, the point had already been proven. Like this group of people are incredibly valuable for this sort of work. So why couldn't we do it here?
That still doesn't take away from the fact that setting up an organisation to do the things you do and, wrangle 700 volunteers, that's still a bloody fantastic thing.
It's been quite a journey. But I guess the point is that we had, plenty of inspiration to do it, and we knew it was going to work, or we knew we had a really good shot at making it work because others had sort of forged that path ahead of us and proven the point. So it helped that a lot. So the other track here is sort of my own journey, and then more specifically the Taskforce Kiwi journey to get started. So I grew up in Christchurch. I somehow ended up in the UK for my OE after uni, and while there I joined the British Army. So I spent best part of 7 years in the British Army, and that included some time in Afghanistan in 2011, 2012, in Helmand Province in the south of the country. I left the army started 2015, moved to Australia, then spent 5 years in emergency management, so mainly bushfire management, so plenty of time out in the bush watching the bush burn over summer in Victoria, up to and including the Black Summer fires, so in 1920. So you got plenty of overtime that summer. It was fairly busy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And then eventually came home in 2020 during COVID, just after we had our first child. Thought it was a good time to get out of Melbourne and come back to New Zealand. We were going to do it anyway. That just brought that decision forward. While I was in Australia, I was involved with what's now called Disaster Relief Australia quite a bit. So did a number of operations in Australia, and also took a team to Indonesia after the 2018 tsunami to do some impact assessment work, which was pretty eye-opening. But when I moved back home, I sort of didn't really think about it much. I sort of put it on the back burner. There had been some discussion about whether Disaster Relief Australia sets up like a subsidiary in New Zealand, but that had never really sort of gone anywhere. So I'd sort of forgotten about it. And that was up until, I think it was sort of August, September 2021. So that was the period where Kabul fell to the Taliban, which affected me in quite a surprising way. Having spent a bit of time there when I was with the British Army, so seeing that unfold and sort of thinking back on, what was put into that, the loss that was involved with that, I took it quite badly. So I had to take a week off work. Had a few moments in there. And it was sort of during that week when I was sort of sitting on the couch doing nothing, probably mainlining really, really bad TV news about what was going on in Afghanistan. I sort of came to the realization that I was either going to sort of sink into a bit of a pattern, or I was going to try and do something about it. Because up until then, a lot of my identity had been around that time in Afghanistan, because it's quite an unusual thing these days for someone to go off and do that. So for me, that was the main, well, not the main point of my life, but one of the main events. And the fact that was a failure had made me think, right, well, how do I rectify that? How do I make some, or take some good out of what eventually turned out to be a less than good thing? So it was during that week that I thought about, right, what do I know? What am I good at? Or what could I be good at? How could I be useful? And it didn't take long to realise that, I know a little bit about disaster relief, having spent a bit of time doing it in Australia. It doesn't currently exist here in New Zealand, so I started doing a bit of research into where the gaps were, and the gaps are pretty big. And then sort of dragged myself to the computer and started writing out a sort of a concept paper, and then just started hitting people up, going, people who might be able to help. And one of them who I hit up was Bevan Killick, who's our board chair. Sort of ran, I'd never met him before, so I sent him a LinkedIn message going, yep, this is who I am.
It's the way to do it.
Here's this document. What do you think? I wasn't expecting a response, but he, probably regrets it now, but he got back to me, and he's been an awesome supporter since. And then from there, did some more scoping over the next few months, and then in the middle of 2022 started doing some low-level recruiting, launched a really, at the time, bad website, and, for a way for people to sign up. And then in August 2022, we undertook our first deployment, which was myself and 6 others went to New South Wales to assist Disaster Relief Australia with one of their flood relief operations. And then from there, it sort of grew arms and legs really quickly, mainly because what was going on. So in end of January 2023, obviously had the Auckland floods, and then straight off the back of that had Cyclone Gabrielle. So for better or worse, we had a very quick chance to prove the value that could be added. So Gabrielle, I think, was just over 4,500 hours over 10 weeks. We brought in, as well as our own volunteers, we had volunteers coming from Canada, Australia, the UK and the US. It was like a multinational effort on the ground, all at no cost to the local community. So that's sort of what really sealed the growth of the organisation, being able to, during what was, probably the worst event since the Christchurch earthquake, being able to prove that we were able to add some really significant value, and it just sort of snowballed from there in terms of size and impact.
I mean, how do you launching? You're still in your infancy, and then I don't want to say baptism by fire because that's
pretty close.
But yeah, because you've been like in that world. But how do you keep a level head, and when that's all happening? I suppose, time in the trenches.
Well, I think it sort of speaks to a lot of the people that we recruit, people who have been in the Defence Force, who have literally been in some form of trench at some point in time, or from an emergency service, so fire, police, paramedic, whatever it might be. So these are people who are used to that situation. It's not a shock to the system. It's almost a normal jogging for them, and it felt relatively normal for me as well from an operational perspective. The only difference was just sort of, compared to, say, the Defence Force or the Fire Service, just the complete lack of resources, an oily rag at best, and then utilising volunteers rather than sort of paid staff, or at least paid coordination staff as well. That was the real challenge. But what was clear was that we were having an impact, and that's sort of all the motivation you really need just to keep going. Like, if we weren't achieving anything, we'd, okay, fine, we'll shut it down pretty quickly. But it was clear that that wasn't the case. So we just managed to adapt over that period of time.
Talk to me about some of the successes and stories you've got from the last few years.
Yeah, I think, say, Gabrielle is far and away our biggest domestic deployment. We had 165 volunteers in total over 10 weeks. And first night we were there, we were doing search and rescue for missing RSE workers, through to the last few weeks doing fencing repairs for farmers, and the feedback we got from communities was that they'd sort of felt somewhat abandoned. Like, there's this perception in New Zealand that, something happens and civil defence is going to show up. Well, it's not actually what civil defence do. Civil defence is a coordination function, not a doing on the ground function. So there's quite a lot of anger in communities that they weren't getting the help they needed, but that anger was abated when we were able to show up and provide that support. So just the feedback from communities was pretty special. And as I say, being able to bring in, I think there was 72 volunteers from overseas, so we had 20 Canadians from Team Rubicon Canada show up. I think there was 30 odd Australians come across over that period of time. So being able to lead literally a multinational team on the ground didn't cost the people of Hawke's Bay a cent, didn't cost the New Zealand government a cent, and we're able to do that. And then beyond that, some of the other successes have been our ability to do international work. So it's not just our priority was always going to be at home. We're really fortunate. We have a really strong partnership with a US-based NGO called Airlink, and Airlink exists to support their partner NGOs such as Taskforce Kiwi by providing seats and cargo space on commercial aircraft. So, if I want to send a team to Australia, I'll submit a request to Airlink, and more often than not, they'll come back very quickly. Here's your tickets, here's your details.
Fantastic.
Off you go. So I think last year, for example, they provided us with the equivalent, I think it was $280,000 worth of air tickets, which is something we would never even able to get close to had we done it ourselves. So I think some of our success is just down to partnerships. So whether it's Airlink, Mitsubishi are a huge sponsor of ours. They provide us with 3 vehicles, 3 Tritons on an ongoing basis, and then more when we need them. So like Wairoa last year during the flood relief, they had another, I think, half dozen utes that we just had at our disposal. Again, costs that we just never be able to meet by ourselves. Mitre 10. So having those Mitre 10 has been great with equipment and support. So those partnerships are a real success. But yeah, the international part's been really good. We've had people providing earthquake relief in Morocco. We had 3 teams on 3 remote islands at the start of last year in Vanuatu doing impact assessment of schools, 88 schools after a cyclone. We had in September last year, simultaneously we had a team in Alberta in Canada helping with wildfire relief, and another team doing the same thing but in Lahaina in Hawaii. Just sort of going through and doing smoke remediation work so people could get back into their homes after the fires they had there. So that for me, that's another real success, is getting people offshore, because that achieves a couple of things. One is it improves those relationships with other organisations that we work with, so we can call on them here when we need them, as we have done in the past. But it also exposes our volunteers to different events and different settings, and it just helps to build their skill sets, so that when we have similar events here at home in the future, we know we've got those skill sets already.
But there must also be the part of being able to set someone off on an adventure.
There absolutely is. Like it's not all selfless, people, and nor should it be. And I'm very much the same. That isn't. When you get a call right, you're on a plane at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, get your gear. It's exciting. It is an adventure, and people do get a lot out of it. And I suppose that speaks to what I consider another one of our successes is we've got 3 pillars that we work to try and provide our volunteers with, which is purpose, identity, and community, which is not a unique thing, but by giving them that task to go and do to help, that's their purpose. They work with people, other volunteers who they may not have served with directly, but who understand their lived experience, so they can communicate with them, they can relate. And then the identity, we give them a uniform, right? You're part of Taskforce Kiwi, you're going out, you're doing this. So for me, that's just as important as the actual impact on the ground as the impact we have on our own people.
Oh, this is bloody fantastic stuff, because it's the same as the yarnsman to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
So many people struggle with identity, especially if you're coming out of Defence Force and things. So you kind of allow them to keep that, and the purpose and the community both with the team, but building the community. You mentioned, people feeling abandoned. You're going and creating that connection as well, right?
Yeah, and we certainly try to. And we have a lot of people who have left Defence, and so with Defence in particular, there's a lot of, when we talk about mental health with veterans, it's often focused on things like PTSD,
yes,
which is entirely valid. Don't get me wrong, but I suppose the less the issue that's highlighted less is just over time there is a loss of purpose, identity, and community. You're going from quiet and intense environment. You're surrounded by people that are essentially your whānau. It's your family. You have a very specific task, and then you leave, and it's basically overnight. You go from having all that to no longer having it, and over time, that can result in some pretty unpleasant mental health outcomes.
Well, this is a big thing through all the work I've done, is always like, well, what are you doing about military suicides and things around that? Has there been any, I suppose it might be too soon to tell, but maybe overseas, has there been any research on the impact of, I want to say, keeping veterans alive by being involved in something like this?
Yeah, so I guess it's important to differentiate what we do to say, there are some great veteran mental health charities in New Zealand, probably more focused on, say, like suicide prevention. We consider ourselves more sort of upriver.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
by
preventing
doing
them from getting to that point. But sorry, to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. So Taskforce Australia has done some good research on mental health outcomes and related to volunteering. The Canadians, Team Rubicon Canada, have done something similar, and the evidence is pretty clear that it doesn't work for everyone, but for a lot of people, just the benefits they get out of volunteering, continuing to serve, are significant.
Yeah, it's fantastic just hearing you talk. It's, you're passionate. I'm getting the feeling from it. I kind of wanted to ask about the PTSD thing. Is that coming up anywhere?
So we're quite clear with our volunteers that we're not psychologists. While you should never underestimate the benefits of service and having a chat with someone who understands where you're coming from in the end of the day's work, there is there's obviously a next step up from that in terms of the requirement for clinical support. And again, we're very clear that we don't provide that. There are others who can do that. It has come up. We've had a couple of people where it's I've had a few where they've admitted it. Well, not admitted, sorry, that's the wrong way of putting it. Where they've stated it on when they've signed up. We ask if anyone has any health conditions, and they'll say yes, I have PTSD. And that in itself is absolutely not not something that's going to get them turned away. We'll very much still welcome people regardless. But it just means that we just want to keep a bit of an eye on those people. And if anything does pop up, then we'll look to find them the professional support they need that we can't provide. Sometimes we don't need to. Sometimes they get what they need out of the organisation. Other times, we do need that elevated support from elsewhere.
What about post-deployment? Do you have a mechanism in place to, I want to say integrate people back in, but is there any, do you guys do anything there?
Yeah, so we do, we check in with people post-deployment because sometimes it's the actual deployment that could cause issues. Seeing devastation to communities is not something that everyone can deal with, and rightly so. So we do a couple of check-ins when people get home. We'll do a sort of maybe a week after they get back, we'll do a group session, sort of a debrief, which will include understanding if there are any issues that have popped up, and then after that we'll also do some calls around in a period of time down the track, just to check in, just to make sure there's nothing that's popped up, and if anyone needs any other support that we can provide.
I'm going a bit off piece because you nailed on my questions with three words. The identity, purpose, and community. I'm just like, I'm not into tease it out of you.
It's efficient.
How have you grown through this journey? Because there's quite a bit here, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I absolutely have grown in terms of. So I guess professionally, I've grown. Managing a team like this is something I haven't done to this scale in the past, so it's been really, really valuable. I've certainly become, I think, probably more empathetic as well, working with people, both the people we serve as in the communities we serve, and seeing what they're going through, but also the individual stories of our volunteers as well. No one person is the same in our organisation, or obviously more broadly. So having to take a really considered approach to each person is something that is, I think I've come to do now. But at the same time, I think there are probably, if I'm being honest, there's probably negative impacts as well. This is really hard work. Trying to do this while juggling a full-time role and a family has been pretty stressful. And there have been times where I think it's probably, on balance, it's probably had more of a negative impact on my mental health than it has on a positive one. But at the same time, there have been periods of time when it's very clear that it has had a positive impact. So for me, it's just trying to find that balance, and I don't think I'm there yet. It's still a work in progress.
What do you do for yourself
when I'm not doing this stuff?
Yeah.
Take the dog up the hill, I think, is probably, when I can on a Saturday morning, just go and have sort of a circuit breaker. Just some downtime, some quiet time. But I think the issue is that because we're an organisation focused on disaster relief, there's no predictability about this. So often when you're most exhausted for whatever reason, that's when something will happen, and that's when the wheels need to start turning to provide the support that we do. So, and part of that is the fact that we're a fully volunteer organisation, including in the leadership level. We have no paid staff, so you're still relying on a volunteer team to do all the coordination as well, which obviously includes myself. So it is always juggling it on top of everything else that you've got going on. While I attempt to find balance, just by the very nature of what we do, it's not always possible.
With the volunteer base now, do you have good, I'm going to call it a rotation policy set up, ready to go?
No, we don't really. We don't sort of have I suppose, a roster every time. Every time there's an event, say there's a what's the most recent one? So we had for the Christchurch floods, for example, the flooding event in May here. That was a localised event, so we only went with local volunteers, but we just sent a call out to all our Canterbury-based volunteers saying, right, this is what we need, these are the dates, times, who's available, and it's purely down to whoever puts a hand up, and then usually we have more people than we need, so it's just about filtering through, right, what skills, a good mix of experience of new volunteers and experienced ones. We definitely have so the usual suspects, so we've got a smaller core of group of people who will volunteer for everything, which is awesome. But at the same time, we also try and ration their time, both because their time is important and we don't want to burn them out just through volunteering. Well. So yeah, we have a good core group, and then we try and match them up with new volunteers coming through at the same time. And it's another real challenge for us is that we often have. Yeah, we've got over 700 volunteers now. Keeping them all interested and all engaged is a real challenge. And we can't always deploy everyone. So a good example is last year we had 2 rotations. So we had 7 people in each rotation go for 2 weeks each to Hawaii. Funnily enough, we had no issue getting people to put their hands up to go to Maui for 2 weeks. So something like that, when you got 7 spots and you've got like 50 people saying yes, I can go for 2 weeks, it's like you almost sort of there is a feeling that you're sort of constantly letting people down because you're not providing them what you sort of initially promised them or at least offered them when they signed up. So that's a bit of a challenge as well.
But I mean, the reality is that if they wait long enough, I'm sure they'll get their chance to go somewhere weird and wonderful.
Yeah, the unfortunate reality is we sort of work in a growth industry. Disasters are not becoming fewer. It's becoming more commonplace, both at home and abroad as well. So there will always be something to do. We could have people deployed all the time if we had the resources to do it. Now, even with, say, Airlink support, getting people overseas, we still have to pay for everything from insurance through to on-ground costs and things like that. It all sort of soaks up funds. If we had the funds available, like I said, I'd have people deployed 52 weeks a year without any problem whatsoever.
So looking ahead to the growth, to the growth industry, what do you think you need and the organisation needs to continue to be effective?
I think we've got to a point now in terms of our size and what we do where while starting out as a purely volunteer organisation was the right way to go about it, it was the only way to go about it. We now have reached a stage where we do need a sort of a very small but sort of full-time coordination team to be able to grow the organisation, to be able to manage, provide that oversight of all deployments, to be able to go out and do fundraising and partnerships and things like that. So that's sort of the key bit that I'm working on at the moment, is to try and secure support that we can start employing people. And I don't necessarily mean myself, but the people who do the actual work, where they can do it in a full-time capacity, which will, in terms of our growth, it'll skyrocket when we have people. The team we've got at the moment doing that coordination, they do an awesome job, but again, they're doing it part-time, they're doing it in their spare time, they've got jobs, families. If they can focus solely on it, then our growth will be pretty exponential from that point, I reckon. So that's the key one for me at the moment.
Healthy for everyone involved.
Well, exactly that, and from they can focus on this as their day job, and when the day job's done, they can go home and not worry about doing stuff at night and trying to squeeze stuff on the weekends and everything that they do at the moment.
So I know you have a specific ask or who you look for your volunteers. Who do you look for, and how can they find you?
So we've been clear from day one that while we do recruit those who've been in the Defence Force or an emergency service of some description, we're not the sort of exclusive club of just veterans. It's absolutely not who we are. So I think at the moment 79% of our volunteers have some form of background in the Defence Force or the emergency services, and it's sort of roughly split between the two, and there's obviously quite a lot of crossover there as well. But then 21% of our volunteers have no background in those areas, which is great for a couple of reasons. One, it means that we can bring in skills that don't necessarily exist in the Defence Force or the emergency services. Mm-hmm. Like, while they do bring some awesome skills, there's some stuff that they don't have. So we can bring that in from the wider community and just sort of improve our capability that way. The other one is just having people with that background work alongside other Kiwis. I think New Zealand has a slightly odd relationship with our veterans, especially defence veterans. Now, we don't want to be all American and be thanking each other for our service all the time, but at the same time, I think there's probably a lack of understanding in the wider community what veterans are actually capable of, what their skill sets are. And by having them work alongside the community, we hopefully help to spread the word on just how capable, most veterans can be. So sorry, the point of that was that we accept anyone who wants to show an interest is more than welcome to sign up. So our website, www.taskforcekiwi.org.
That'll come up in the description.
Excellent, good. And there's expression of interest. You sort of fill that out, just who you are, where you are, a bit about yourself, a few questions, a bit about your skills and experience and background. From there, we run inductions usually 1 or 2 a month. They're just online to jump on for 2 hours or so, where we just tell people more about the organisation, just to ensure it's actually something they want to be involved with, so they know what they're signing up for. And then from there, there's some more onboarding, so we do sort of police checks and things like that. And then once that's all done, we'll get them to a point where they're what we consider deployment ready, and they're ready to get them out the door, and that can all happen quite quickly, depending on what's going on.
Do they need to run through a training course, do a beep test, and
Not as we haven't got any fitness requirements in yet. Do some sort of pack hike at some point, but no, at the moment. And I think that's probably another good point, is that a lot of our work is physical work, whether with a shovel clearing silt, with a chainsaw clearing trees, whatever it might be. But there's also a lot in there that isn't physical. So there's roles for everyone. So a good example is with the Myanmar earthquake from March, end of March. We had a team that was doing sort of remote impact assessments using satellite imagery, sort of looking at towns like, what's the infrastructure damage, how many buildings are destroyed. You don't need to be physically fit for that. As long as you can sit behind a computer, you can do that sort of work. So, the point is that there's roles for everyone. If you're fit, great, you're going to be shoveling sand, or you'll be given a sledgehammer. If you're not as capable, there's plenty of things that we can get you done.
Look, Richard, fantastic yarn. Love the work you're doing. It's sort of one of those things where I wish I hope you don't have to get to too many deployments.
Well,
but
that's it. Yeah.
But equally, it sounds like it is. We're really lucky to have you and the rest of the organisation. So thank you very much, and keep it up.
No, thanks, Matthew. I appreciate the time.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks.